You think love is supposed to feel clear, warm, steady, obvious. So when someone looks at you like you are oxygen one moment and then disappears into silence the next, it does something violent to your mind. It makes you question your memory, your instincts, your worth. You replay their voice, their eyes, the way they reached for you when no one was watching, and you wonder how someone can feel so close and act so far. You wonder if it was real. You wonder if you imagined the depth. You wonder if maybe the problem was that you cared too much, wanted too much, felt too deeply. But here is the part no one tells you. When an avoidant is deeply in love with you, it rarely looks like love at first. It looks like contradiction. It looks like intensity followed by distance, vulnerability followed by retreat, need followed by numbness. They move toward you like their body knows you are home, and then they panic, like home is the most dangerous place they have ever seen. And if you do not understand what you are looking at, you will misread the entire thing. You will think the silence means indifference. You will think the withdrawal means you meant nothing. You will think the emotional confusion means there was never any love there at all. But sometimes the truth is much harder to hold. Sometimes they did care, more than they wanted to, more than they knew how to survive. That is the brutal truth. The more real it feels, the more an avoidant can shut down. Not because love means nothing to them, because it means too much. Because closeness does not just activate pleasure in them, it activates threat. It wakes up an old alarm in the nervous system, an ancient expectation that intimacy will cost them freedom, safety, control, or selfhood. So while one part of them is falling, another part is reaching for the emergency exit. This is why being loved by an avoidant can feel like being embraced by someone with one foot already out the door. They are not always running from you. They are often running from what you awaken in them. And what you awaken is not casual. It is exposure. Real love strips away the distance they use to regulate themselves. It melts the structure they built to stay untouched. It asks them to remain present in moments where their whole body is wired to escape. So what looks cold from the outside is often a nervous system flooding from the inside. The brain does not separate emotional danger from physical danger as neatly as people think. When an avoidant feels too seen, too needed, too emotionally responsible, the amygdala can react as if something is wrong, even when everything is right. Stress chemistry starts to rise. Cortisol begins to speak louder than desire. The body that wanted connection now wants relief. And relief, for them, often looks like distance. This is why they can miss you and ignore you at the same time. Why they can love you and delay the text. Why they can think about you constantly and still act strangely detached. Why they can hold you like they never want to lose you, then go quiet for days and make you feel like you were never in their heart at all. It does not always make sense, but love inside an avoidant rarely moves in a straight line. It moves in waves of activation and deactivation. When they are close to you, dopamine rises. There is longing, fascination, relief, even tenderness they cannot explain. But with deepening attachment comes vulnerability, and vulnerability can feel like loss of control. So the same bond that brings pleasure starts to trigger internal pressure. Their system swings from craving to overwhelm, from wanting to shutting down, from presence to retreat. This is why an avoidant in deep love often becomes more confusing, not less. Not because their feelings are weak, because their defenses are colliding with something stronger than those defenses were ever designed to handle. And here is where people make the mistake that destroys them. They chase clarity from someone whose whole pattern is built around escaping emotional intensity. They demand reassurance in the exact moment the avoidant feels least capable of giving it. They protest, they push, they try to force the confession, the commitment, the emotional certainty. They think, if I can just get them to explain, then I will finally feel safe. But pressure is exactly what makes the avoidant disappear deeper into themselves. Not because your needs are wrong, but because their nervous system interprets emotional demand as engulfment. So, instead of moving closer, they go blank. Instead of becoming more expressive, they become harder to read. Instead of saying, "I love you and I'm scared," they say less and less until their silence becomes the whole conversation. And silence is the core concept no one understands until it is too late. Because with avoidance, silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes silence is overload. Sometimes silence is internal war. Sometimes silence is the only way they know how to regulate emotions that feel too big to organize into language. Think about what it is like inside them for a moment. They are lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom weight of your presence even when you are not there. They miss you, not casually, not politely. They miss the way you soften the room without trying. They miss the text they have not answered. They miss the version of themselves that almost emerged around you. They remember your laugh at inconvenient times. They hear your name in places you are nowhere near. They want to reach out. But then another voice enters. What if this gets too serious? What if I lose myself? What if they expect more now? What if I cannot sustain this? What if I disappoint them? What if they see how emotionally limited I am? What if I need them more than I should? And just like that, longing becomes tension. The love is still there, but now it is tangled with fear. So they do what avoidants do when something matters too much. They reduce contact. They distract themselves. They become busy. They convince themselves they need space. They focus on work, routines, noise, anything that gives the illusion of control. They tell themselves they are just tired, just stressed, just needing to think. But underneath all of that is one unbearable fact. You got through. And that is what changed everything. People they do not care about do not disrupt them like this. Surface connections are easy for them. Casual affection is manageable. People they can charm without depending on. People they can keep at a distance. People who ask for little and touch nothing deep. Those people feel safe. But the person they truly love, that person becomes emotionally dangerous. Because now there is something to lose. Now there is someone whose opinion can wound them. Now there is someone who can touch old grief they thought they buried. Now there is someone who can awaken the child inside them who learned that closeness can turn into pressure, disappointment, invasion, abandonment, or shame. So the avoidant in love does not always become more romantic. They often become more guarded. They watch their words more carefully. They pull back after moments of tenderness. They seem deeply present one day and unreachable the next. They may do loving things without naming them as love. They remember details. They show up in practical ways. They protect without confessing. They hover at the edge of vulnerability and then retreat before the fall becomes visible. And this is where your pain begins. Because what they feel and what they show are often not equal. That gap can break your heart. You can feel the undercurrent and still starve from the surface. You can sense their love and still be wounded by the way they fail to hold it properly. You can know they are overwhelmed and still bleed from the distance. Understanding them does not erase the impact. And that matters. Because too many people romanticize the avoidant struggle while abandoning themselves in the process. They turn someone else's incapacity into a puzzle they have to solve. They become hyper-attuned, endlessly patient, emotionally available to the point of self-erasure. They wait for breadcrumbs and call it depth. They accept confusion and call it chemistry. They become so focused on what the avoidant feels underneath that they ignore what they themselves are experiencing in reality. And reality matters. Because love, you have to decode constantly, can slowly teach your body to live in anxiety. It can make your nervous system addicted to inconsistency. It can make pain feel intimate and uncertainty feel meaningful. That is not always love. Sometimes it is just activation dressed as destiny. But if you want to understand how an avoidant acts when they are deeply in love, you need to understand this next part, because this is where the power dynamic starts to shift. The moment they feel you slipping away, something sharp happens inside them. Not because they suddenly discovered your value, they always felt it. But while you were available, they could regulate themselves with distance. They could tell themselves you would still be there after they cooled down. They could take your patience for granted, even if unconsciously. They could stay in the fantasy that connection could pause without consequence. The moment your energy changes, the moment you stop chasing, stop over-explaining, stop trying to drag love out of someone who is hiding from it, the structure changes. Silence stops being their protection. It becomes their torment. Because now they do not feel crowded by your presence. They feel confronted by your absence. And absence is where avoidants often feel the truth they spent so much energy outrunning. Now the dopamine loop changes. What was familiar is no longer guaranteed. What was steady is no longer available on command. The nervous system that once relaxed into your pursuit now has to face uncertainty from the other side. They start wondering what you are feeling, whether you are done, whether someone else sees you the way they failed to say they did. And suddenly, the person who could go cold becomes preoccupied. They check your activity. They reread old messages. They feel phantom conversations in their head. They imagine what they would say if they reached out. They feel jealous in ways they cannot admit. They become haunted by all the tenderness they withheld while they still had access to you. This is why an avoidant can seem almost transformed once they believe they are truly losing you. Not because the love was created by distance, because distance removed the illusion of control. Now the attachment is exposed. Now the feelings have nowhere to hide. Now the silence they once used becomes unbearably loud. They miss your warmth, your predictability, your softness, your emotional courage, the way you made room for them even when they gave you so little to work with, the way your care kept touching places in them they pretended were numb. And this is the part that shocks people. An avoidant in deep love can become obsessive in private. Not always expressive, not always healthy, but deeply preoccupied. They may not write the grand confession. They may not suddenly become emotionally fluent, but internally, they can be consumed. You live in the spaces between their tasks, beneath their routines, inside the quiet they keep trying to fill. You become the unfinished sentence in their chest, the almost, the risk they did not take, the safety they could not receive. And if they do come back, it can feel powerful. Their tone softens, their messages become less guarded. They reveal pieces they once hid. They circle around vulnerability, then finally touch it. They may not say everything cleanly, but there is urgency now. There is fear now. There is a different kind of presence, one sharpened by the possibility that you are no longer waiting in the same place they left you. But this is where you have to be careful, because breaking the pattern is not the same as reversing the roles. If you use distance only to make them chase, you are still trapped inside the same dance, still orbiting them, still measuring your worth by their reaction, still watching to see whether your silence is effective enough, powerful enough, painful enough to wake them up. That is not freedom. That is strategy born from injury. And injury cannot create peace. The real shift happens when your silence stops being a performance and becomes a boundary. When your non-reactivity is not manipulation, but self-respect. When you no longer disappear to provoke longing, but to protect your mind from living inside someone else's ambivalence. That is when everything changes. Because avoidants are deeply sensitive to emotional pressure, but they are also deeply affected by emotional self-containment. When you stop reaching from panic, stop explaining from fear, stop trying to earn what should be given freely, your energy becomes different, cleaner, more grounded, harder to control, harder to dismiss, harder to forget. You are no longer asking to be chosen. You are observing. You are no longer arguing with their confusion. You are listening to your own body. You are no longer trying to prove your value through patience. You are remembering that love should not require self-betrayal. And that is the moment an avoidant often feels your power most intensely. Not when you beg, not when you protest, not when you make yourself small enough to fit inside their comfort zone. When you become emotionally unavailable to dysfunction. When your heart stays open, but your self-respect gets sharper. When you stop translating crumbs into promises. When you stop calling inconsistency potential. When you stop mistaking their inner conflict for your responsibility. That is when the dynamic flips. Because now they are no longer managing your pursuit. They are facing your absence of pursuit. And for someone who loved you but hid from the depth of it, that can feel like withdrawal, like loss, like panic. Like the sudden realization that the one person who truly saw them is no longer waiting at the edge of their fear with open hands. And yes, they may start chasing. They may start missing you more openly. They may start revealing what they buried. They may start obsessing over what they lost. But even that is not the ending. Because the final lesson is not about whether they come back transformed. It is about whether you do. This is the identity shift no one can give you until pain has burned enough illusions out of you. You are not powerful because you can make an avoidant miss you. You are powerful when their inability to hold love no longer makes you question whether you are lovable. You are powerful when silence stops sounding like a verdict on your worth. When distance stops hypnotizing you into proving yourself. When someone's confusion stops feeling like a call to abandon your own clarity. When you no longer need to be chosen by the emotionally unavailable to feel chosen by life. That is self-worth. Not coldness, not revenge, not superiority. Stability. It is the moment your nervous system stops begging for what your soul already knows. You deserve love that does not require translation. You deserve presence that does not vanish when it becomes real. You deserve intimacy that deepens without punishing you for needing it. You deserve to be met, not merely felt. Wanted, not merely remembered. Held, not merely missed. And if an avoidant truly loves you, they will eventually have to face the cost of hiding from that love. But that cost is theirs to face, not yours to carry. Your job is not to wait at the door of someone else's fear until they decide you are safe enough to let in. Your job is to become so anchored in your own value that love can no longer enter your life disguised as confusion. So if you have been sitting in the silence, wondering whether they cared, wondering whether the distance meant you were forgettable, wondering whether your tenderness was wasted, hear this clearly. You were not hard to love. You were simply deep enough to reach a part of them that terrified them. And that says everything about their wound, not your worth. Let that sink in, because the moment you stop personalizing someone else's emotional limitation, you get your power back. The moment you stop chasing closure from people who are still running from themselves, your life begins to open. The moment you stop treating your heart like a negotiation, you become unshakable. And that is what changes the story. Not whether they return, whether you do. Whether you return to yourself, to your standards, to your body, to your peace, to the version of you that no longer confuses emotional scarcity with love. That version of you does not beg for crumbs. That version of you does not romanticize retreat. That version of you can feel compassion without self-abandonment, can understand attachment wounds without offering your nervous system as collateral, can love deeply without disappearing inside someone else's inability to receive it. So yes, an avoidant can be deeply in love with you and still go silent. They can ache for you and still withdraw. They can miss you terribly and still resist you. They can care more than they know how to say. But your healing begins the moment you realize that being deeply loved in secret is still a lonely place to live. You were not made for almost. You were not made for decoding. You were not made for emotional exile. You were made for reciprocity, for truth, for calm, for a love that does not leave you in the dark just because it is scared of its own depth. And once you truly know that, not just in your mind, but in your body, everything changes. Because now, whether they come closer or stay hidden, whether they awaken or remain at war with themselves, whether they chase or keep pretending they do not feel it, You're no longer waiting to be chosen. You already are.